And
Olga, I can't hear you.
oh, now can you hear me now?
There we go. Yeah, perfect.
Of course I did this. This is live. I just muted myself. This is what I do. Thanks for telling me. Well, I'm Olga Pishnyanka. I'm the host of Get Me Someone Who Can Sell, and our show is for CEOs and leaders of growing companies that want to figure out how to get the people on their sales team that can actually sell. And so we have guests every other week or so that talk about that. And today I have a treat for you. I've got Nathan Foreman with me, and you're muted too. And I've got Nathan Foreman with me, who is awesome. So when I talked to Nathan a couple months ago, he really caught my attention because he talked about something that's really dear to my heart, which is being a player coach. And we talked about some of the, fun things you do and some of the hard things to do when it comes to that. And I knew I wanted to get him on the show so we could talk about it and shine the light on all the challenges and all the lessons that he learned when he was a player coach. So on this note, he's done some amazing things that we will get into as the show goes by. And if you're here with us, thank you for being here. And if you're just rewatching it, enjoy it. So Nathan, usually my first question that I like to ask my guests is always going to be the same. Before we get into nitty gritty, what interested you about sales, and how did you know that this is something I will be good at? Doing sales. Like, what's your hero's journey into it?
Boy, that's a great question, because I always kind of, like, when I talk to people, I joke that I went to music school for college, right? And my aspiration right from when I was a early trumpet player in elementary school was to be a professional musician. And so it's like, quite a journey I've had across my career. But I think one of the things I noticed early on, and I think people notice about me, was from an early age, I had a very curious mind, and almost more kind of like on a psychological level. So, like, I would really probe into people. Like, I'm just so curious. Like, how are you thinking about that? And what did you like? How did you react to this and that? And then on the other side, I also had a very natural persuasive ability. So I almost just kind of almost fell into sales. I didn't think I was going to go into sales. I thought I was going to be a professional jazz musician in New York City for a while. But then I had to pay the bills. And I had to eat. And so
That's funny.
My first intro to sales was very, very interesting. I had finally said to my girlfriend at the time, okay, I get it. I have to have a day job. So she actually said, well, we've got some temporary work at this publishing company that she worked for. And you can come in and just make some money for 4 or 5 hours a day, helping us, stuff envelopes. And so I swallowed my pride and I went for the paycheck, and I went and, stuffed some envelopes. And there was one day when the receptionist was out, and the office manager asked me to sit in on the phones. And so I got on the phones. I had the whole headset and the whole deal. And sure enough, our CEO, the CEO of the publishing company at the time, was traveling, and he called the main switchboard to talk to someone on the staff. And I did the announcement or whatever, and he was like, "Who is this?" I said, "Oh,
I noticed."
Yeah, I'm Nathan, sir. I'm Margot's boyfriend. I'm helping to stuff envelopes or whatever." And he said, "No, you're not going to do that. Go report over to Mike in telemarketing. I want you over there." I was like, "Okay."
So what do you think he saw? Like, what do you think he heard? Like, what was the key for him?
I don't know. It was maybe a timbre. It was I have no idea, but he liked the sound of my voice, and he thought others would like it too. And so I reported for duty over in telemarketing. I stopped stuffing envelopes, and I became a top performer selling packages of technical conferences to computer programmers in telemarketing.
You make it sound so easy. So when you first joined there, did they have training that you had to go through, or did they just throw in and you just had to swim?
They threw you into the deep end. There was a script, that you could follow.
Okay.
Um, and so yeah, we just were calling down lists. There was barely a CRM available at that time. Some of the folks on the phone, if they're as gray as me in the beard, probably remember Goldmine or other like CRM applications back in the day that weren't networked. They were all on premises
Yep.
software. And we got our lists, and we had our scripts. But it was interesting because I also, again, my curiosity, calling down people, I noticed that there were a few international customers. People like IBM overseas would like send 40 programmers to these conferences, and there was no way to reach them by phone because of the time difference, or it was very hard to reach them. So that's when, and this is, mind you, in probably 1994, 1993, right as the internet was starting to kind of just, come out. But we were selling
Mhm.
technical conferences. So these computer programmers knew all about the internet because they were already using it in their professional capacity. So I and a friend of mine that I actually ended up bringing into the company, we ended up coming up with an online internet strategy for selling these technical conferences 24 hours a day online. And
So
so part of my curiosity was like, how can I get that? How can I do this better? How can I increase the volume of revenue? And sure enough, it did increase it because we had an online form where they could fill out. We were doing outbound emails even back at that time, and it worked out really great. But I was always so curious, like, where are the other ways? Where are the other channels that we can use?
usually during the interview, as I hear something that I think is super helpful is you said already two things that I like. If you're hiring for sales, watch out for is the curiosity, because that is across the board like one of the most common. Like you have to have that in a salesperson. And
Yeah.
then number two is how do I figure out this problem? There's a problem. How do I figure this out? And not waiting around for somebody else to figure out, but like what you did, put a format there. Let's see what happens. And then of course, there's either it worked or it didn't work, but at least you had to do something. So
Yeah.
those are the big two traits that for those who are hiring, you got to watch out for, because it's hard to teach and it's hard to make somebody be that way, because it's kind of how you wired.
Yeah.
So okay, so your first success was at least on LinkedIn that I saw was they grew I-33 Communications. Was that the company where you stuffed the envelopes, or was it a different company?
No, but it has a good segue, because when we started signing up conference registrants online, we also started to expand into, at the time, what was CD-ROMs for storing data.
Mm-hmm.
And in these computer programmers, they would go to these conferences and they would end up leaving with reams and reams of like computer code in printed format. And so one of the other things that we did was, just by seeing the success of the internet with regard to the revenue on the conferences side, we decided to expand into a whole new media strategy, which I helped to found at the publishing company as well. When my partner and I at the time, my buddy, when we saw all of the types of programming languages that our customers were using, that segued really, really nicely into CD-ROMs and other forms of new media, even back in 1994, 95, when we were doing this. What we ended up doing was we basically took all of those reams of paper and we put it on a CD-ROM so that we could just hand a CD-ROM to conference registrants, and they tuck it in their bag and they go home. They don't have to have a whole separate box to take all
Yeah.
the information. That then segued into I-33. We had met a gentleman who had a graphic design company that he made a ton of money on annual reports. He was just doing annual reports for big New York law firms and accounting firms, what have you. And so we connected with him through a mutual friend, and we said, hey, we think there's an internet opportunity here. And so we founded I-33 on his graphic design company.
So you're one of the founders. So basically, you grew from 0 to 10 million. In what period of time? Like, how long did it take you?
It was about 4 or 5 years we grew. Yeah.
Amazing. I mean, in today's dollars, I don't even know how much that is, but So you were the first hire, obviously.
Yeah.
Uh, and was that your first time where you tried to be the player coach? Is that kind of how you grew into? Did you end up hiring more salespeople, or was it just you until you guys sold?
We did. I was running sales, and by running sales at that point, I mean I was literally, well, it was an interesting. Again, it gets back into the kind of curiosity thing, right? So like, you think about a conference strategy on a publishing company that you're working for, and then at I-33, we were really trying to figure out how can we have credibility with like the big brands that were just starting to dip their toe in the water. And so to start, I was just like calling down a list in a phone book, if you can believe it. Like that's how I was prospecting, right? And I started with A, and when I started with A, I was looking at the American Heart Association, all of these organizations that were like Association of or American or whatever, and I just calling down, and we were able to get some
Wow.
traction there. But the second thing that we did was I also were calling on advertising agencies. And our thought back then was, if you get an advertising agency to outsource work, internet work that they don't know how to do, then you can put Johnson and Johnson and Hertz Rent-A-Car and all of these big brands that they do work with. You can put those on your client list, even though it's contracted work that you're having through the advertising agency. So we then launched a big campaign to the advertising agencies offering kind of outsourced support, because there was a lot of technology back in the day that had to be incorporated into the back end of a
Mhm.
website. And these folks didn't know how to do it. They knew how to do all the branding and advertising, and they were brilliant at it. But in New York City, Silicon Alley, time, there wasn't a lot of expertise, and I-33 brought a lot of that expertise.
So you started with hypothesis. Okay, let's try this. Let's see what happens. And then you kind of started seeing what sticks. And then at what point did you start hiring your first, salesperson underneath you, or kind of growing the team? Like, do you remember? Because I know it was
Yeah,
up
so
there.
we founded I-33 in 95, and then we were acquired in 1999, right before the internet bubble. And I would say that I think we had two or three salespeople that me and my founders hired.
That were
And
producing, right?
yeah, that were producing. You're making me have to dust off some of the cobwebs to remember back.
No. But it's always interesting because you literally were the guinea pig. Your company that you co-founded was the guinea pig for this concept of player coach, where you have to hire them, coach them, mentor them, motivate them to
Yeah,
produce, right? And
yeah,
so that
yeah,
was your first time. Well, that's a pretty amazing success. Congrats on that. Like, that's an amazing exit for so early in your career.
yeah.
And then, so from there, how did you end up going into the education route? So you were kind of more on the media side, communication side, and then you, like, most of your career, from what I remember, now has been in the ed tech. So how did you like what like, I have questions, like, how
Yeah,
did you
yeah.
move there? Like, what happened?
It's such a fascinating story. So, and that dovetails from my I-33 experience to when I did when that exit happened. I had a nice little nest egg from that, and but it was a very interesting feeling of being 29, not having retirement money or investment money to go out and start a brand new business, and I honestly, I had a good amount of money, but I felt a little lost. Like, what do you do now? You end on such a high note of like, being and then when you're 29 and it's an internet startup, you can like pretty much call yourself anything in terms of a title or whatever. And
Right,
so
right, right.
I was the global head of sales for an internet, at that maturity level. It's like, what am I going to put together a resume and go get a day job? Like it's just the weird
Right, right.
things that you think of back then. So it took me a little while to really figure out what I really wanted to do. And I went back to one of my passions, not music necessarily, but my other passion is food. I've always loved the restaurant industry, the pageantry of it when you go out to an important, nice dinner or whatever. Like, I love how the whole inner working. So I decided to open a restaurant in New York City. And so that's kind of what I did. And I ended up getting out of the restaurant business, not by my own decision, as I'm sure a number of people can relate to. And then I went on to do a couple of more things back in my my internet development days. And then I remember sitting in a diner in New York City with my daughter, and this guy walks by the table, and he looks at me and he says, "Nathan, is that you?" And I look up at him, and it was one of the designers I had hired at I-33. And he said, "Oh my gosh, like we haven't seen each other for like 10 years. I know what's been going on." And so he said, "Would you want to grab some coffee or grab a beer and catch up?" And so we did. And he had just been named the CEO of an ed tech company for private schools around tuition management.
Wow.
And so what he said was, "Hey," I said, I'm working out in New Jersey. It's a huge commute, and it's, and he's like, "Well, would you consider coming in and doing some consulting for me? Because my investors and I just acquired this company. We have to kind of integrate them together. That includes doing a complete Salesforce evaluation of the reps that they have now and the kinds of things we're going to need and playbooks and the whole deal." He's like, "Can you help me?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I ended up consulting with him, and kind of re-engineered all of the territories and quotas, and did all of that stuff that I'd done at I-33. And I actually did. That's where I first became a player coach. Was that at that company? It was called Smart Tuition.
Oh, okay. So since now we're segueing into that. So that's because from there it looks like you've been kind of moving up in the ed tech world. So you've kind of, at least on LinkedIn, that's what it says. So you kind of stayed in that field. So we're going to talk about what makes it so special that you love it so much in a little bit. But with the player coach, so for those who listen, like it's such a loaded term, right? And like I said in my post, there's two camps out there. Those who think that this is the most amazing thing for growing companies, and those who are critical about it and say that player coach doesn't really work because you're splitting the role into two roles, and then that's not really efficient. And of course, and that's why I love the controversy of the role, because I know you got to have that role if you want to grow. So like in the perfect world, of course we want to have all these different positions, but let's be real, when you're first starting out and the company's growing, you got to go with what you got to go. You just have to find the right person for that role, because that's super important. Not everybody can do the role. So how would you define player coach? Like, what's your definition before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of it?
Yeah. So from the advantage that I see, and there's one clear advantage to being a player coach at really, and what we're talking about, like we really are talking about like more on the startup side, right? And that's been my experience when I went to Smart Tuition, and now when I'm with August Schools. The advantage there is that you have credibility with the people that you are technically coaching, right? It keeps you on the ground. It keeps you centered on you're seeing on a daily basis what prospective customers are saying, how they're reacting to certain things in the playbook. You're learning over time how to run a productive demonstration based on needs analysis and pain and problems, and then you can take that back to your team. So you do have to be careful, though, that you don't overextend yourself. I will say that being a player coach in more of a middle management or early stage company where you're revenue hungry, and you have someone like me who has a plethora of experience actually selling in a particular vertical, and then you have other people that you end up hiring, and then you're kind of overseeing them, making sure that you're doing the things you need to be doing, and according to your playbook and what have you. But there isn't such a thing as a successful player VP of sales.
Yeah.
Right?
That's gonna be challenging.
It's too much. And so you have to be very careful that you're when you get to a certain point in the company's evolution, you have to understand that there are additional roles that are appropriate to bring in, but phased in and at certain growth stages of a particular company. People in my role also have to be just very brutally honest with themselves, professionally and personally, about what they want to do, right? So like, I personally have been selling and also managing since the last time I was 100% manager, and I just missed the sales part of it, right? I missed the competition. I missed the feeling of closing a deal, that kind of thing, right? So I immediately went out of being a sales manager only and went back to being in sales, enterprise sales, because I just loved it. And I was very honest with myself, and I'm still honest with myself today about like, I'm always going to want to be a mentor. I'm always going to want to add to the sales strategy, but I'm not looking to be a CRO anywhere, because I know where my lane is and I know what makes me the most happy in my career. And so that's where I'm sticking. It's got to be in front of customers. It's got to be figuring out complex problems. It's got to be offering relief to people looking for solutions in their own business, whether it's a private school or what have you. And I love that feeling. And so I think some people that get into a player coach role will be like, okay, well, now I need to transition to coach full time because that's just what people do, right? And they may not be cut out for it. They may not enjoy it. That's a high stress, high pressure role to be in that role. And there's a certain type of person that's like perfect for that role. And ironically, a lot of VPs of sales and CROs are not terribly good at sales or actually selling. And they would say that by their own admission. They're really good at executing the book, right? Executing the playbook, knowing the metrics to be looking at, knowing how to fine tune certain things, knowing how to get that highest effort out of people, inspiring, leading, all of that type of stuff.
Yep.
That's a whole other skill set other than being a top-notch enterprise salesperson. So you really have to kind of, when you're a player coach and you're on the cusp of like when the company's starting to grow, you have to be really careful, like that you're doing the right thing for yourself personally and also the right thing for the company that you're working for.
Right. So player coach, like if I sum it up, it's basically player, which is individual contributor, so they're selling, and then the coach, they are mentoring and coaching and helping new hires that are coming in to get them up to speed and grow the company. So what do you think is a sweet spot, right? So if you look at the bootstrap company, the CEO, the founder, they're usually the ones that are selling, get to the point where they just can't handle everything that's going on and selling. So they're hiring their first individual contributor.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where, and I'm curious to hear what you think, but this is where for us, when companies come to us, we always talk about that first hire, if the CEO is not sales, trained, or they don't have the training, is they're going to gamble if they're just going to get an individual contributor who doesn't have that player coach mentality, because then they don't know how to manage themselves. And then they're going to be setting up, the CEO setting them up for a failure unless there's other resources to help this person to come and build the book or pick up what the founder built and kind of build on top of that. Mm-hmm. And so that's why a player coach is an amazing hire early on, because it can help you grow from, let's say 2 million that the founder grew to, I don't know, 5, 10 million and below. So I'm curious to see, like, what, in your experience, what are those sweet spots? And I know it depends on the industry, but from your experience, like, what does that look like? And when does it make sense and when it doesn't make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think it makes sense at early stage, right? Because everybody's got to wear multiple hats at an early stage company when you have 15 employees, maybe less. I think what folks need to be looking for is, in a resume is proven success track record in terms of, quota attainment, looking at similar types of deals. Doesn't have to be vertical specific. It can, when I'm hiring, I'm looking at people that just have the raw ability to, please excuse my puppies. If any...
they have a lot to say too. They're very passionate about the player coach.
But I'm looking for people just with raw sales ability and full cycle sales ability, right?
It's okay. Don't just go through it. It's fine.
So, but then on the other side too, like, I think one of the advantages of when I've gone to companies you know, I've needed to work under a process for myself, right? Like, so I needed to like, okay, how am I going to segment and decide what my ideal customer profile is? How am I going to, who do I call first? Like, what is the messaging around, like in my current position at August Schools, we sell software to independent schools and school districts for school nurses and counselors to document care, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in that particular case, what I did is, as a salesperson, I'm stepping back and saying, okay, it's a nurse or a lead nurse, it's a head of counseling, it's an information technology person, and it's probably an assistant principal or that sort of thing. So I have 4 personas that I'm going to target, but I'm going to target them with different messaging, right? So as an experienced salesperson will probably bring with them certain sales tactics and strategies that they've been taught by their previous managers. And so I think what people have to be looking at that want to hire a player coach is, have you had any just basic management experience?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times your top salespeople will become automatic mentors, and maybe they won't run a whole sales team like I have in my past, but they will have like overseen a team, right? So you look for people that like, you know, rose through the ranks. You know, maybe they had 2 or 3 reps reporting to them and more of a coach mentor, not a head sales role.
Right.
And they knew how to like create at least an initial process where you can be targeting the right people at the right time, with various different types of channels, whether it's LinkedIn or calling or emails or all the other kind of things, and then have the finishing touch, which is the measurement capabilities to find out if those things are actually working, right?
That is super important. And it's that critical thinking too, right? Because it's like, you know, if you just hiring an individual contributor who's never done that thinking before, they're just expecting to come in and kind of not be told what to do, but kind of, yeah, like, what am I supposed to do? Because a lot of times companies want to hire this magical person that will can figure everything out. But if they haven't had that experience, you sort of, you're gambling.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's why the first hire, you got to be smart about who you're going to bring on board. Somebody like, for example, like Nathan, who's done this before, when they come in and they're not going to waste too much time barking up the wrong tree. They're going to know they're going to have to bark some trees up, right? Like there's going to be some of that, but they're not going to be disappointed because, you know, it's your fault or that fault. And so if there's no training in the company, and most growing companies like startups and stuff, they don't really have that in place yet.
Yeah.
And unless they're hiring a consultant who can come in and do that part of the job, like player coaches for me is like a no-brainer path to go.
Yeah, and that's, you brought up a great point, because if you've got someone with experience, even if it's enterprise experience, people that have worked for consecutive years at the same company, and you've seen them start as a BDR, SDR, to an account executive, to a senior account executive, to this or that and the other, they probably have some institutional knowledge of the types of process and systems and measurements, and just, you know, strategies that they can help a leader put into what ends up becoming the playbook for sales, right? And the playbook for sales has everything to do with like your ideal customer profile, your personas, what your sales motion is, and you can work on that with an experienced enterprise salesperson as a CEO starting out. And that's really one of the most important things to get going is your playbook. Like, who are we focusing on? Why are we selling? What are we doing? Why are we doing what we're doing? And how do we communicate that to the market? And then how do we follow through with a sales process where you're going through discoveries, looking for problems to solve, bringing multi-threading is what it's known as, bringing in multiple people at the organization, multiple stakeholders, getting multiple layers of buy-in, understanding the buying process understanding how to negotiate. Price points are very important, right? Like, how do we set our pricing appropriately? And then how do we move to close? And all of that has to be included. And an experienced enterprise salesperson, or someone who has management experience, middle management experience, and also sales experience, can help a CEO to. And there's a ton of templates out there for like playbooks and that, you know, that whole.
Mhm.
You can start out with a consultant too, but the big thing is, what is our playbook? What does our sales motion, look like?
Right. And how to tweak that. So when companies interview for a player coach, they gotta kind of obviously interview for sales skills and if the person has what they need to have to be successful in sales. But then I remember early in my career, my sales coach told me, as a manager, I had 5 jobs, and I was like, wait, what? I thought I only have accountability. I got to hold them accountable. And they're like, no. You got to hire them right. You gotta motivate them, understand what their goals are. You gotta, mentor them, kind of share your knowledge. You gotta coach them to like understand like what you just told them. They can actually role play with them. You need to know that they know what we just talked about, and only then you can hold them accountable. And I was like,
Yeah.
what?
Right.
And yet, like, if you don't hire for that, then you don't really have a player coach. Then you just have an individual contributor who is doing their best, doing their job, and then on top of that, they have to do something that may not even be passionate about, because that is a skill set.
Yeah.
So that's just what I've been taught. Is there anything that was helpful for you as you became the player coach to understand, like, okay, I'm selling, and now I got to put a hat on to manage or to coach or to hold them accountable? Like, how does that work for you? Like, what is the two different skill sets that you had to be clear on?
I think, and I think I've said this in other podcasts that I've done, like the most important thing that a sales manager can do is create a safe space within their sales organization where people don't feel afraid to ask for help. And they trust that everybody's got everybody else's best interest in mind. And so one of the ways that you achieve that as a salesperson coming in as an individual contributor, I really want to perform very, very well. I need the tools to be able to do that based on my experience of what I need to in terms of reporting, and all the other things that go into just like making sure you're documenting all the parts of the process. And so when I came into my most recent organization, there were two salespeople that were already there. They saw me as someone with a lot of experience, but I didn't come in and just start hacking things out. And I just came in and I said, listen, I have one big job to do, and that is to create as much opportunity and revenue for this startup as possible, as quickly as possible. And so I worked with our sales ops people, and I said, these are the things that are missing in terms of the types of things I like to track for myself, right? And so I created a kind of a whole sales process for myself to start. And then the other two, and then I started selling, right? And so that's when you start to get that credibility from other people.
Yep.
They start to see your performance, and they're like, oh, wait, you have this whole new, oh yeah, I use this section when I'm logging, a call. It automatically creates an updated task and blah, 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 and all this stuff that's like sales motion-y stuff. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, and that's leading you to that much success. I'm going to do that too. And so an experienced sales rep, I came in just pure sales. I wasn't managing when I came into my most recent position. It's just that I put process in place that would help me sell better. It was adopted just organically. And then came a certain point, okay, I've proven myself. Now I'm actually going to be officially the director of sales. And we're going to look at all these different numbers. We're going to look at all these things together as a team. But I'd already built the credibility by the process I put in place. And I already built it because I was selling a lot. Right.
Yeah. That helps.
And so that really, it really does help. I mean, it's interesting. We're a startup. It's like, you kind of don't, if you're an experienced person, the CEO is probably going to come in and be like, you're super experienced. I think I see you in this role going forward in terms of being the leader of the sales organization. But to start, we got to sell, right? Yep. So please come in, please, and we'll see how things are going. That's a lot of what like startup company, like you're a critical piece of this role. And so let's just see how that goes. And you almost kind of just naturally, like a feather, you just naturally just kind of fall into that role, as opposed to coming in being like, unless that's what a CEO wants. CEO may want to hire a director of sales, build out the team. They have a big seed or a series A, and they want to grow that fast. And that's a whole different strategy. From my perspective, right. I just kind of became the de facto director of sales because I had put the process in place and I was already mentoring the people that were already here.
So, and you tell me how much you can tell me and how much you cannot in terms of numbers. So in what role would you say so far you're really proud of what you've done as a player coach? And then I'll ask you which role you think you learned the most, could have done better.
Yeah, for sure. I think the most success I ever had was going back to the Smart Tuition days, my first entry into education technology. And the amazing thing about that company itself was I had no idea that when I first talked to my old friend from I-33, who I ran into in the diner, I had no idea that there was any type of company that would process tuition payments. Like,
Right.
it's those weird verticals, right?
You're right.
Yeah.
Like, oh, there's a
And
company for that.
yeah, right, exactly. And so the thing I really loved about it was ed tech. I know a lot of people talk about like antiquated software in schools and that sort of thing, but there's also a lot of innovation and a lot of amazing technology that's going into different educational organizations. And back then, I saw that happening firsthand because we had a platform that was just beautiful from a technology standpoint, right? And payments was just starting to heat up, right?
Wow.
In 2006,
Talk
2000.
about right time and right place.
Yeah. And that was payments everywhere. I mean, there was no Stripe back then. There was no Zelle. There was no, like, none of that stuff was in place, but you could kind of see it, coming. And so I love the technology. I love the high techness of that company. At the same time, what they were doing was, and I don't know if it's kind of hard to remember, but 2007, 2008 was a very severe financial crisis that the
Yep.
country was going through. And so it was harder and harder for families to afford tuition in private schools, in particular, Catholic schools. And Catholic schools minister to everyone, right? And so that's where they go, where the need was. So the thing I loved about the company was that there was also kind of a philanthropic side to it, right? Like, we were helping schools survive, particularly these faith-based schools that were really catering and ministering to the most to the parents and students most in need.
Mm-hmm.
I say that because I think that's why it led to my success at that company, because I felt like we were on a mission. And that's also
That gave
really,
me goosebumps. That's because that's huge. Like,
yeah,
when you're part of the mission, everything else just like so many things don't matter anymore.
right, right. So that was the foundation. And when after I did my consulting stint there, when I was brought on, full time, my first job opportunity as a player coach was a manager level right below the EVP of sales, right? So it was, I was a senior VP of sales for the East Coast, and I had a counterpart that was the West Coast. And we oversaw about 3 or 4 reps each.
Okay.
But we still managed a small territory ourselves.
Uh-huh.
And so that's where, where you'd be able to, just talk the talk and walk the walk with your reps, because you were cold calling too, right? There's no complaining. Don't complain to me about how prospecting sucks, because I know, because I do it, right? Like,
We're
so
on a mission. Get on it.
yeah, but like, exactly. And it was like, this could be, we had proven that this could be game changing for people, that because a lot of people were just like, still collecting paper checks for tuition, and parents would forget, and they're stressed, and then they don't pay their tuition for 6 weeks. And that's, I mean, in 2008, that meant that the Catholic school that serves this really important constituent closes, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah. Cash
all
flow.
those
Yep.
kids have to go somewhere else. So we absolutely, it was helpful to have that perspective too, to hear the stories. At that point, I was pretty seasoned, and so I could share, like, in the storytelling, I would be able to identify certain things just based on my experience, and then continue to refine that skill, that selling skill, and bring that back to the team, and also understand what the proper metrics were that we were trying to
Right.
look for in the actual data of, like, I remember we got it down to a science where we knew that if we had moved an opportunity to an 80% probability, for example, we would close 70% of those. And you need to be looking at those types of things. And then you need to have a really simple system for people to use, to be super honest and realistic about what their forecast is, what their pipeline actually is.
Can you tell me more about that system in a nutshell? Because that's super interesting. Like, what was that a way? Like, what does that mean? Like, what kind of system was that?
So it absolutely was. Well, it was linear to a certain extent, right? And so there are certain things that are just logistical, right? Like, for collecting tuition, when do you send out your first bill? Like those are the things that are important to find out that are part of the whole sales motion, right? It's the timing of when you're going to implement something, right? Um, and so that was just remembering to get all of that information down so that then you can plan a specific evaluation plan so that you're looking at milestones. So every software company I've ever worked for has a definitive go live, generally speaking, of when like it, and it's interesting because when you frame it, you're like you're framing it in terms of like, when do you want this problem solved by?
Right.
It's not like, when do you want to do all the coding and blah blah blah. Like, we've identified some pretty significant problems that you have, and
I
so
like that.
when would you like to start solving them? When is that point? And then what you're doing is you're working backwards from those dates, and you're being super clear about how. Listen, anybody who is on the receiving end of an evaluation doesn't know how software evaluations work.
Right.
So the other important thing is you have to guide people, and you have to say, I'm the expert. I'll be your tour guide for the next, however long it takes you to generally do an evaluation and get to a decision to buy. I'll be your tour guide, and I'm going to tell you how successful evaluations have worked. I'm going to tell you who we need to be involved. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions to look for any problems that we can solve for you that aren't just like, oh, that'd be nice to have, but like a need to have. Like, oh my gosh, like
Right.
back in the tuition management days, it was like some schools were writing off 25, 30% of their bad debt at the end of the year. That's just money they were just like, we're not going to get that. And they were like, well, at least it's only 20%. I'm like, you should be freaking out if it's like 2%.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? And so it's part of like challenging their perceptions of like what they think is okay, and then putting a solution in front that could help them solve that problem or the pain
Wow.
diagnosis, right?
Right.
And then who do you have to get on board? Like, who else cares about this, right? I know you're the champion and you love all the things I'm talking about, but that doesn't mean you can write a check for it, right?
Right.
So it also means that you have to say, okay, if this were up to you, would you want to move to solve this problem? And if the answer is yes, it's like, okay, great. Do you want our help specifically to solve the problem? Or you could solve the problem with somebody else too. Like, I haven't done my whole, like that's a whole other question, right? Yes, I think you're the best solution. We've looked at a couple of other. Great. Now we're on the same team. And now what we're going to do, it's kind of like I always joke about it, it's like the Jerry Maguire moment with a prospect, right? Help me help you, right? You've already agreed that if it were up to you, you'd do this, right? So now let's map out a way that we can multi-thread this into other stakeholders at the prospect, so that you can make sure you're bringing everybody else on board. And then we have to like really make a case to a head of school who is budget conscious, and really show them like, these are all the advantages. These are problems we uncovered. This is how we're going to solve these problems. And then you're smooth sailing from there.
Wait, are you saying that to have accuracy in forecasting, you actually have to do pain discovery and budget and stakeholders? I mean,
Right.
really? That works?
Yeah, exactly. This job would be so much easier without all these prospects.
I mean, but so you're saying something. I mean, so everything you said is just gold, because like the happy ears in sales is the worst, right? When you're like, oh, it's gonna close, and you're asking, well, have you done this? And it's like, no. It's like, how do you know it's gonna close, right? And so to me, what Nathan is talking about is ability to ask tough questions, because none of what he said is easy. It's so much easier to email or whatever, just like go around the bush, when somebody like Nathan over there is actually closing the deal by getting the answers to the tough questions. And so if your salesperson or your player coach is not willing to ask tough questions, I guarantee you're not gonna get to predictable revenue at all, or close deals predictably. So what you just said, none of that is easy. I mean, sure, it sounds easy, but actually being there and asking those questions and challenging them and being that trusted advisor is huge. So the success of the Smart Tuition, so they sold that company, right? So you had another successful exit there.
Yeah, that was Smart Tuition was acquired and by another larger student information system software company that serves private schools called Blackbaud.
Yep.
And so they were looking to get into the tuition management space. They had payments, but they didn't have that expertise in terms of billing and that sort of thing. So yeah, that was a $200 million acquisition for the Smart Tuition platform that got then integrated into Blackbaud. So I had become the EVP of sales for Smart Tuition, and my task was and my charter was basically to help our existing sales team, of which there were 3 SVPs and then 12 sales reps and another 10 BDRs, right? So it was a 25, 30 person team.
Wow.
It was my goal and my charter was really to kind of ease the integration into Blackbaud and look for other opportunities where we could leverage that relationship now that we had with Blackbaud as our parent company to increase revenue for our. So again, it's a resegmentation. It's leveraging that relationship. It's going out to that full customer base and saying, we're now part of this. You should look at our solution. And that's what led to a lot of that year-over-year growth that we had. And then the other thing that I was responsible for was to hit our 2-year covenant. So we had to basically hit certain numbers, and we actually did. So I was very proud that we got. It was a long integration from our company into Blackbaud over a couple of years, but we really focused in on how can we hit these numbers. And
so how would you measure? What's your definition of knowing that you are being successful as a player coach? Like, how would you sum it up? Like, what's success look like for a player coach?
I think when you start to see, well, I'll give you an example. I have a new AE that I'm at the tail end of their ramp right now. And we're going through demo boot camp, right? So it's a matter of like just prioritizing each module and being able to, explain all of it individually, and then you start snapping them together based on the pain that you've identified and so forth. And I think the one area where I had him record a piece of his demo, and he sent it to me, and then he emailed me and said, don't watch that. And I was like, what? I'm not going to be. He's like, no. I didn't say this, and I didn't say this, and I didn't say this. And those are all things that I had said, you gotta, this is what you need to focus on in terms of this type of pain we've identified. And he's like, I didn't use the proper terminology. He wasn't discouraged at all, but he was just saying, I can do better. I went back to my notes. I need to just reworkshop this. And so I love when folks are like, they see me doing certain things, those are leading to successes, or it's moving a deal in the direction that it should go in. And then they start adopting those things. So there is part of the training where you're saying, this is all the stuff you need to be aware of. This is all the stuff you need to be saying. This is all the stuff you need to be looking at. But at the end of the day, it's also when I go into a demo and where I'm just kind of sitting in the background, and the rep that I've been training is using in their own way, not trying to be Nathan, right, but in their own way, they're covering the stuff and they're pivoting and they're diving deeper and they're being curious. And whenever they do those types of things unprompted and in their own voice, not sounding like me at all, but accomplishing the same outcome, then I know I've succeeded.
Right. So not only are you hitting the numbers on your bag of business that you gotta hit as a player coach, you're also seeing how that translates into I don't want to say predictable, but your reps are doing what you guys talked about and trained about, and like you are seeing that is happening. So sounds like there's 2 ways to like see that you're being successful, because if you're only hitting your numbers on the revenue but your reps are not successful, that doesn't mean that you're successful as a player.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. But it's employing the things that are proven to work, right? So like I have call scripts that I've used personally, and again, this is the type of thing where you have a player, maybe an aspiring coach, where once you learn the company's products that you're working for, you'll automatically start to create scripts for yourself that you can refer to that you think are going to be the most effective and the most impactful, right?
No, right.
And so those are documented and those are in a playbook, right? And so then it gets into the inspection piece of it. And this is where you start to get into more of a VP of sales position, right? Like, if you need to start, and this is where it gets a little tricky because you don't have a lot of time to be a full VP of sales and also an individual contributor. You just don't, because you need to be listening to phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be looking at deals. You need to be doing very careful surgical inspection of opportunities, right, during one-on-ones and so forth.
Right.
And so, that's the point where it gets a little, where you have to just, okay, are we at a time now where we need to grow the team from, 4 to 10, and that's when a VP of sales or someone that's just going to be dedicated to that, starts to.
So what is the sweet spot in your experience? So obviously, player coach could come in where there's no players and he's the first player coach.
Yep.
And then, or he or she,
Yep.
Anyway, and then so you hire a couple people, and then at what point do you think it's the player coach starts breaking down? Like at what point do they need to start thinking about bringing, more, I don't know, VPs, sales managers,
Yeah,
heroes?
it's definitely like a phased approach, right? I've worked for a couple of different startups now. One of them I founded, and it's a matter of
They're just confirming what you were saying. It's okay.
yeah. I think someone's at my front door, but I'm going to just ignore it for now. It's
a phased approach, you said.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of each individual phase, right? So like the phase one is like the scrappy, like we're starting up. We just got to call. We don't have any credibility in the industry. Nobody knows who we are. So that means we have to really double down on the amount of outbound we're doing, really leveraging every customer that we've signed to date, and try to have any kind of credibility in the industry. But it's like a full court press.
Right.
The second phase is when you've got, when I first started, at my current position, we had 5 clients, and now we have 130 in about a year and a half. So we've grown significantly. So when you get into that phase 2, now you've started to get different software companies that you're integrating with, noticing, oh, wow, you guys are, signing a lot of our customers to your platform. You're asking for a lot of integrations, blah, blah, blah. So I think you're still able to kind of like have the player coach model in that particular sense. But as the inbounds increase, as your outbound has to increase because your revenue has to continue to increase at high percentages year over year, when you get to like kind of that phase 3 level where you definitely need to supercharge your sales team, you need to hire more people, that's when you need to get a dedicated sales leader.
Yeah.
Because the dedicated sales leader is then going to come in with fresh ideas about the modeling in different ways. They're going to be doing a lot deeper inspections because your goals are going to start to increase, right? It's, from 0 to 1 million is one goal, and then from 1 million to 3, and then from 3 to 5, and then beyond, right?
Yep.
And up to 10. And so each one of those is a fairly significant growth that needs to have very professional sales leadership at the helm.
Yeah.
And so I think in that phase 3 area, that's where you're really looking for a sales leader that's going to then start to manage a team of 5 to 10 people, listening to phone calls, making sure that the next, it's all an evolutionary process of creating your playbook. And then that playbook grows and it changes as you learn more and more and more. And that's a whole evolutionary process that someone needs to own, and they can't be prospecting and owning the playbook at the same time.
Yeah. All right. So I know we're running out. See, I told you it's going to be
it goes fast, right?
I mean, so I have a couple more questions. One is, in what role, you don't have to tell me the company name, but in what role you could have done, you could have been more successful, or maybe you learned the most lessons in that role. So as a player coach or individual contributor, kind of whatever comes to mind, because those are also, I think, those are some of the best opportunities personally where I've learned the most, where things didn't go as much as, as well as I wanted, or, it wasn't as great as I expected it to be for me. Like, do you have any? Maybe you don't have anything, but.
Yeah, I mean, there are I think you always, as you're looking at a potential opportunity, I think you do have to be careful to make sure that the opportunity is going to be right for you, like personally. And there are some different like types of like warning flags that you should, be looking out for. The one particular role that I won't go into too much detail on was something that was a great opportunity. But if I would have really looked at like how the role was set up, because it was kind of a strategic role that was created, and then what the goals were going to be for, this was a company that acquired a lot of different companies and tried to like integrate them together. So I think that was a big learning experience of like, I don't know whether I would have accepted that position if I'd have known that I was going to have to bring everyone under one umbrella that came from 4 or 5 different sales processes.
Wow.
So that was a challenge that I kind of probably overlooked because because I wanted the position so badly. So I think that's the other thing, is just make sure you're going into a player coach role like eyes wide open, and understand like what are the expectations, how will they be measured, what's the upside if I'm really going to dedicate, because being part of a startup,
there's a lot of sweat equity there too.
That's a different thing, right? That's a different thing. It's super hard. It takes a lot of time. And so understanding what the expectations are, what the roles, what's the support going to look like, right? I've gotten into situations where I'm a very collaborative person. So I like to collaborate. I like to bounce ideas. I like to build off of other people's ideas and that sort of thing. There have been a role or two where I kind of felt like I was out there on an island. And so also understanding that as well. And also from your CEO's perspective, like understanding that any good player coach is going to want that collaboration with you.
That's a big one, because that's where a lot of times CEOs like, I just want to hire somebody and never, I don't want to do that. Make it for you. That's not going to happen. Like, you need to collaborate because there's a lot going on. Like, they're not going to fix everything that you possibly think about. So thank you for sharing kind of what your lessons you learned that worked, and like what do you need to succeed in this role. And those maybe who are listening, you're muted.
My dogs are going nuts. There's somebody at my door. Olga.
Okay. Yeah. So I gotta let you go then. So if that's okay with you, thanks for sharing for all of that. So if you can think of anything else that would add to that, leave it in the comments. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
No, you're good. This was awesome. This was super helpful.
In the age of Zoom, where dogs barking or whatever, we're still there, folks.
And one thing I promised Nathan, I will say, Nathan is hiring right now. So if you're looking for a sales job or role, please check it out. He's a great boss to work for, and doing great things out there. So thank you, Nathan. Hopefully this was helpful, and I'll be happy to have you on again. Talk to you later.
Thank you, Olga.
Bye.
Bye.